Today you will learn the incredible story of Gideon Hawthorne, a man who, after a near-death experience, had impactful visions about the future of humanity and a warning about the events of November 2024. Prepare yourself for a journey of transformation, spirituality, and surprising revelations. Before we start, write in the comments which city you are watching this video from and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this. Chicago is a city of extremes. The bright lights of major avenues often mask the darkness that lurks in the hearts of those who live and work there. In my case, the work environment wasn't just toxic. It was a constant psychological battle. I felt like a mouse trapped in a maze, running in circles while everyone around me seemed to be thriving. The office room where I spent my days was cold and impersonal, with glass walls that exposed everyone without offering any privacy. The whispers around me were like invisible knives, piercing deep into my already fragile self-esteem. "Hey, Gideon, did you see the emails I sent? Maybe that's above your level, but I can explain later," said Emma, a colleague who was a master in the art of sarcasm disguised as sympathy. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the comment. "Of course, Emma. I'll take a look and get back to you," I replied, knowing she never really expected me to contribute. These episodes were daily, and it didn't take long for me to start internalizing what I heard. Maybe I really am not good enough, I often thought. It was like being in a room full of mirrors that distorted my image until I barely recognized myself. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number of Thomas Whitaker, my childhood friend. Thomas was everything I wasn't: confident, successful, and most of all, wise. "Thomas, I'm lost," I said, as the weight of everything that was troubling me spilled over into my voice. "Meet me at our usual diner. Gideon, let's talk," he replied, his voice like a balm for my wounded soul. Sitting in a booth at the small diner in downtown Chicago, I shared everything that was tormenting me. Thomas listened to me patiently, his eyes fixed on mine as if he was seeing more than my words could express. "Gideon, you are not defined by what these people think of you," he said, holding my hand. "What's happening at work is about them, not you, but you need to believe in yourself first." His words touched me, but there was still a lingering doubt. What if I can't? What if it's too late to change?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's never too late," he replied firmly, "but you need to start fighting for yourself. You deserve better." That night, as I drove home, I felt a small spark of hope. I repeated Thomas's words like a mantra. I deserve better. I can change this. But life, with its cruel way of testing our convictions, had other plans for me. The rain fell incessantly, transforming the streets of Chicago into a liquid mirror that reflected the lights of streetlights and traffic lights. The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers was almost hypnotic, and my thoughts were still deep in my conversation with Thomas. For the first time in months, I felt a small spark of optimism light up, as if his words had lifted some of the dark clouds that had been hanging over my mind. As I drove fast, my attention was diverted to the radio, which was playing nostalgic music from my teenage years. I smiled, almost feeling transported to a simpler time, when problems seemed smaller and dreams more achievable. It was at that moment that everything changed. At the intersection of two avenues, I saw the lights of another car coming towards me. It was too fast. The driver appeared not to have seen the red light. My heart raced, and my mind screamed, "Brake! Turn!" But it was too late. The impact was brutal. The sound of metal crunching, glass shattering, and tires screaming against the asphalt was deafening. My body was thrown against the seatbelt, and my head hit the steering wheel. An intense pain shot through my chest, and then everything went black. When I regained some consciousness, I realized something was different. There was no pain, no sound, not even the sensation of being trapped inside the car. I opened my eyes, or so it seemed, and found myself surrounded by a deep, almost palpable darkness. My first thought was confusion. Am I dead? Is this death? Then, in the distance, a light began to shine. She was small at first, but grew with a welcoming intensity. I felt inexplicably drawn to her, as if she were a promise of safety and relief. Each step I took toward the light felt easier than the last, like something was gently tugging at me. The darkness began to dissipate, and I realized I was in a tunnel, its walls flowing like water illuminated by golden reflections. There was a growing peace within me, as if the weight of all my worries had been lifted away. Suddenly, a figure began to form at the end of the tunnel, standing out against the bright light. It was a presence that exuded serenity. His wings, made of pure light, seemed to pulse gently, and a gentle smile lit up his face. The figure was unmistakably angelic. I didn't know if I should kneel, speak, or just stand still. Before I could decide, the sweetest, most reassuring voice I had ever heard echoed around me. "You are safe, Gideon," said the figure. "I am Elora, and I am here to guide you." I felt small in his presence but at the same time, completely welcomed. What happened to me? Am I dead? I asked, my voice coming out as a fragile echo. "You are in a space between life and what lies beyond," Elora replied. "But don't be afraid. This is a time for learning and reflection." As she spoke, I noticed my anxiety was disappearing. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, as if all the fears I had carried throughout my life were being dissolved in that instant. "What happens now?" I asked, not knowing what to expect. "Now, Gideon," she said with a soft smile, "let's look at your journey. There is much for you to understand before you decide your next step." She reached out her hand, and when I touched it, a feeling of warmth and peace completely enveloped me. When I touched Elora's hand, the tunnel disappeared, and I found myself in a vast, undefined space, as if I were suspended in the universe. All around me, stars shone and moved as if they had a life of their own. In the center of this infinity, a kind of ethereal screen began to form, flickering with a light that seemed to come from within me. "Now, Gideon, let us revisit your journey," said Elora, her voice as soft as the breeze of a spring field. "But remember, this is not a judgment. It is an opportunity to understand the impact of your actions and to learn from them." The first image that appeared was a memory from my childhood. I was at my grandmother's birthday, surrounded by my family. The laughter was contagious, and I felt safe, loved. The memory was so vivid that I could hear the sound of the wind in the trees and the aroma of my grandmother's lemon cake. "These moments," said Elora, "are what truly matter. They are the bonds that connect you to others and give you purpose." My vision began to change, and another scene took shape. It was my first job as a systems analyst, more than a decade ago. I found myself talking to a colleague, brusquely, ignoring his ideas. I relived the hurt expression on his face and felt a rush of shame. "Why am I seeing this?" I asked Elora, my voice shaking. "Because even the smallest interactions leave marks," she replied. "You were insecure, Gideon, and it caused you to push others away without even realizing it." More images appeared, like a patchwork of moments from my life. I saw discussions at work where I used sharp words to defend myself without thinking about the consequences. I relived a breakup where I was cruel in my words, just to mask my own pain. Each scene brought a mixture of shame and regret. "I was so selfish," I muttered, looking away. "For everyone makes mistakes, Gideon," Elora said, resting her hand on my shoulder. "The important thing is not to avoid mistakes, but to recognize their impact and learn from them. You can still change." She gestured, and the screen showed a moment that made me cry. It was a recent scene, a co-worker crying after a hard day. I had completely ignored her, immersed in my own suffering. Feeling that moment again made me realize how my selfishness contributed to the toxicity that hurt me so much. "I could have helped," I whispered, "but I chose to do nothing." "And now you understand," Elora said, her voice full of compassion. "Understanding is the first step to growth." But they weren't just mistakes. The screen also showed me moments when I made a difference, helping a friend in need, standing up for someone who was being treated unfairly, or simply doing a spontaneous act of kindness. These moments shined with a special light, reminding me that I was not just my failures. "You are not defined by your mistakes, Gideon," Elora said. "You are defined by what you learn and what you choose to do from now on." I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from me. For the first time, I realized that life is a tapestry of choices, some imperfect, but all with the potential to teach us something valuable. "I'm ready to change," he said, with a firmness he had never felt before. "And that's the best choice you could make," replied Elora Canton with an encouraging smile. After reviewing my life, I felt that my heart was lighter, as if the weight of past choices had been lifted. Elora held my hand again and, without saying a word, led me forward. The vastness of space around us began to change. The stars that once seemed so far away now shone with brighter colors, pulsing as if they were living entities. Suddenly, I felt the ground beneath my feet, soft, luminous grass that seemed to caress my skin. I looked around and took my breath away. The place where I was seemed beyond human imagination. Majestic mountains rose on the horizon, shrouded in golden clouds. Rivers of crystal-clear water flowed with a serene sound, while endless fields of flowers swayed gently in a light that came not from a sun, but from everything around them. "Welcome to the place where harmony is absolute," Elora said, watching my expression of wonder. "This is a reflection of what they call heaven, but it is more than that. It is a state of peace and wholeness that your soul can achieve." Walking beside her, I saw children playing, laughing and running through flower fields. They seemed free of any worry or pain, as if they were the purest expression of joy. Animals of all types roamed free, interacting with each other and with children without fear or hostility. A little blue bird landed on my shoulder, its song so sweet it brought tears to my eyes. "Everyone is welcome here, Gideon," Elora explained. "No matter where they come from or what they've been through, each soul has their unique place in this universe of love." As I took in the beauty and serenity around me, I noticed a figure approaching in the distance. He walked with a calm step, but there was something about his presence that seemed to illuminate everything around him. When he got closer, I recognized who it was. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of indescribable emotion. "Jesus," I whispered, almost not believing my eyes. He smiled and extended his hand to me. "Gideon, we finally meet," he said, in a voice that seemed to mix every note of comfort and hope I had ever heard. When I shook his hand, I felt a wave of warmth and peace course through my body. He looked at me, his eyes piercing but full of love, as if they saw into the darkest corners of my soul. "You have many questions," he said, still smiling, "and some of the answers you seek are already within you. Why me? Why am I here? Why do I deserve this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You are here because your journey is not over yet," he replied. "But you need to understand something. God created you with a strength that you often underestimate. It is your responsibility to use that strength to transform your life and the lives of those around you." The conversation with Jesus lasted what seemed like hours. He explained to me that God doesn't just act as a problem solver, but as a guide who gives us tools to overcome our challenges. "Not all prayers are answered the way we hope," he said, "but that doesn't mean you're not being heard. Every difficulty you face is an opportunity for growth." Before leaving, Jesus touched my shoulder and said, "Remember, Gideon, heaven is not just a place. It is something you can create in your life and in the lives of others. Be the light that lights the way for those who are in darkness." I stood still, absorbing his words. As he walked away, Elora smiled at me. "You're ready for the next step," she said. "There's something else you need to see." After Jesus said goodbye, I felt a mixture of calm and curiosity. I had already experienced things that challenged everything I knew about life, but the journey was far from over. Elora looked at me with a more serious expression, although her serenity remained intact. "There's something you need to see, Gideon," she said, extending her hand again. "It's a revelation that will shape not only your life, but also the future of many people." I held his hand, and immediately the scenery around me began to transform. The celestial beauty disappeared, giving way to images that moved quickly, as if I were traveling through time. When everything stabilized, I realized I was in front of a kind of ethereal screen, different from the one used to review my life. This one was bigger, vibrant, almost pulsing with energy. "Watch," Elora said, in a voice that now sounded deeper. The screen showed a calendar, highlighting the days between November 16th and 20th, 2024. Images began to emerge, showing global leaders, some I recognized from recent news, others who were enigmatic figures. Documents and files were exposed, videos and audio were leaked. Everything seemed to connect to a network of corruption and manipulation on a global scale. "What is that?" I asked, unable to look away from the images. "It's the revelation of what has been hidden for a long time," Elora explained. "The hoax that keeps humanity trapped in illusions is about to be exposed." I saw crowds in the streets, some celebrating, others furious. The world seemed to be in upheaval. Journalists broke stories that challenged decades-old narratives. The faces of the unmasked leaders showed fear and despair, while ordinary people seemed torn between hope and confusion. "This is going to cause chaos," I muttered, feeling a weight in my chest. "Yes, initially," Elora replied, But chaos is often the prelude to transformation. For something new to emerge, the old must be confronted and often destroyed. Suddenly, the screen showed something even more shocking. It was as if humanity was being pushed into a collective awakening. People from different backgrounds and cultures began to come together. I saw individuals supporting each other, communities being formed based on truth, and a spiritual movement emerging from the ashes of the previous collapse. "What does all this mean to me?" I asked, still trying to process what I saw. "You were chosen to see this because you have a role to play," Elora said. "When you return to Earth, your testimony will be a tool to prepare others. It won't be easy, but your voice will help guide those who are lost." The images began to disappear, and once again we were enveloped in the infinite emptiness of space. I felt a mixture of fear and responsibility, as if an immense burden had been placed on my shoulders. "Are these events written?" I asked hesitantly. "Or is there something that could change what will happen?" "Humanity's collective choice will determine the ultimate course," said Elora. "But remember, the truth, when exposed, cannot be ignored. It forces change, even if those changes are difficult." Elora placed her hand on my shoulder, conveying a feeling of strength and security. "Now, Gideon, there is one more step before you return. But for now, absorb this and prepare yourself for what is to come." I was perplexed, but also determined. The images, the words, and even Elora's tone had planted a seed in me, the seed of a greater mission. Elora led me back to the tunnel of light, but this time there was a different weight in the air. I knew my journey was nearing its end, and my return to life seemed inevitable. However, the experience I had, heaven encountering Jesus and prophetic vision, transformed me in ways I still could not fully understand. "It's time, Gideon," Elora said, her voice sounding like a distant melody. "Your mission is not yet complete. You must return to Earth and use what you have seen and learn to help others." "But how?" I asked, my heart clenching with the weight of responsibility. "What can I do in the face of all this? I'm just an ordinary man with a flawed past." Elora smiled gently, her eyes shining with understanding. "That's precisely why you were chosen. True transformation doesn't come from those who are already perfect, but from those who learn from their imperfections. You are not alone, Gideon. There are greater forces guiding your path." I wanted to argue, but before I could say anything else, a familiar presence made itself felt beside me. It was Jesus. He was closer than ever, his hand resting on my shoulder. His touch radiated an indescribable peace. "Remember, Gideon," he said, "you don't have to change the whole world at once. Start with those around you, show kindness, speak the truth, and live with purpose. The impact of small actions can spread further than you imagine." I looked at him, seeking courage. "I'm afraid of failing," I admitted. "Everyone does," he replied, with a serene smile. "Fearsome, but fear is just a shadow. The light inside you is brighter." With these words, I felt renewed strength. Elora reached out her hand once more, but this time, her touch seemed to be pushing me back. The light around me began to intensify, and the sound of distant voices began to fill the air. I was being taken back. Suddenly, I felt my body again. The weight, the pain, the pressure, it all came back at once. I slowly opened my eyes and saw a white ceiling lit by fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic hit me, and I realized I was in a hospital. All around me were familiar faces. My mother was at the bedside, holding my hand tightly. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but now they sparkled with relief. "He's awake!" I heard someone scream, and more people approached. My voice was weak, but I managed to whisper, "I'm here." Those two words brought a flood of emotions, both to me and to those around me. The doctors rushed in, checking my vitals and muttering among themselves about how unexpected my recovery was. I should have died in that accident. The impact, the severity of the injuries. Nothing explained how I was still alive, but I knew. I had seen things beyond human understanding, and I had returned with a new perspective and a mission. The gratitude I felt was overwhelming, but there was also a sense of responsibility that I couldn't ignore. "You came back for a purpose, Gideon." Jesus' words echoed in my mind. As I looked at the worried and relieved faces of my family members, I knew that this new chance at life was not to be wasted. The days following my awakening in the hospital were a mixture of physical pain and deep reflection. My body was hurt, but my mind and soul were changing. The memory of the near-death experience was vivid in my mind, every detail recorded as if it had happened minutes ago. Jesus and Elora's words echoed in my thoughts over and over again. You are not defined by your mistakes. Transformation begins in small acts. This made me realize that I couldn't just go back to my old routine as if nothing had happened. My life before the accident was filled with bitterness, isolation, and guilt. Now, I had a new chance, and I knew I should use it wisely. That first week in the hospital, I decided that I needed to start with work, the place where my conflicts and insecurities had become most evident. I sent messages to some colleagues I had had problems with in the past, apologizing. Emma, the colleague who often teased me, was the first to respond. "Hi, Gideon," she wrote. "I was surprised by your message. I never imagined you thought that way. I think we could all have been kinder. How about we start from scratch when you get back?" This response was the first sign that the changes I wanted were possible. Additionally, I began to rethink my faith. I always believed in God, but my idea of spirituality was passive, based on the expectation that prayers would solve everything. After the NDE, I understood that God gives us the tools and strength to act for ourselves. I decided that my faith would be expressed in concrete actions. This started with small gestures, helping a colleague finish a project, donating my time to local causes, and being more present for my family. My relationship with my mother also changed. Before that, I just saw her as someone who expected too much from me. Now I realized how much she was always by my side, even when I felt unworthy of her love. One night, as she sat by my bed, I held her hand and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." She smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I would never give up, Gideon. You are my son, and I will always believe in you." Another point of transformation was my connection with the community. I signed up to volunteer at a local shelter, where I met people who faced much greater challenges than I did. It was there that I began to understand the true power of empathy and mutual support. During one afternoon at the shelter, while distributing meals, a man named Carl told me his story of overcoming. "Your resilience has deeply inspired me. I fell so many times I lost count," he said, laughing. "But you know what I learned? That we can always get up, as long as someone lends us a hand." These words reminded me of what Jesus had said during my experience: "Start with those around you." I was beginning to understand the impact of small actions and how far they could spread. Over time, my outlook on work, faith, and life as a whole changed. The routine stopped being just a succession of purposeless days and became a series of opportunities to live with more meaning. Every conversation, every gesture, every decision was now a reflection of the person I was becoming. But I knew there was more to do, especially regarding the prophetic vision I had been shown. It continued to unsettle me, as if it were an essential piece that I needed to share. As I recovered and reorganized my life, the visions I witnessed during my near-death experience never left my mind. Each scene, the leaders being unmasked, the crowds reacting, the initial chaos, and the movement of spiritual transformation felt as real as the moment I woke up in the hospital. It was as if something bigger was at play, something that couldn't be ignored. Sitting in my bed days after returning home, I decided I needed to take action. My experience could not be kept inside me. The messages I received weren't just for me. They had a greater purpose. I started writing down everything I remembered, detailing every vision, every word Elora and Jesus said, and every emotion I felt. I wanted to organize my thoughts, but most of all, I wanted to find a way to share it with others. My first attempt was with Thomas Whitaker, the friend who had helped me on the night of the accident. I invited him for coffee, and as he sat across from me, I felt a twinge of nervousness. "Tattered Thomas," I began, hesitantly, "I need to tell you something about what happened to me when I was between life and death." He leaned forward, his gaze attentive and encouraging. "I'm listening, Gideon. What did you see?" I told him everything, from the tunnel and the meeting with the angel to the vision of the events of November 2024. I spoke about the leaders being exposed and the chaos transforming into a movement of unity and spiritual awakening. Thomas was silent for a few moments, processing what I had said. Finally, he took a deep breath. "That's powerful, Gideon. It's not something you can just keep to yourself." "But how do I share something like that?" I asked. "People will think I'm crazy." "Some, perhaps," he admitted, "but others will listen and find hope, or at least a reason to reflect. You don't need to convince everyone. Just reach those who are ready to listen." Inspired by her response, I began sharing my story with small groups. I spoke at community support meetings, friends, gatherings, and eventually was invited to speak at a local church. Every time I shared my experience, I felt a deep connection with the people who listened to me. During one of these talks, a woman named Clara approached me after the event. "Gideon," she said emotionally, "my faith has been shaken for years. What you shared today gives me hope that there is a greater purpose in all of this." Clara wasn't the only one. Others began reaching out to me, trying to understand what they could do to prepare for what was to come. I spoke about the importance of unity, the search for truth and the courage to face changes with an open heart. Visions of November 2024 have become a focal point in my messages. I explained that although the events I saw seemed inevitable, how people reacted to them was crucial. "The truth will be exposed," I said, "but what we do with that truth will determine the future of humanity." This call for collective responsibility began to resonate among those who listened. Small discussion groups emerged, where people shared their own spiritual experiences and explored ways to support each other. Despite the positive impact my message was having, I still felt restless. He knew he was just scratching the surface. The visions were a warning, but also an opportunity. My role was to prepare as many people as possible, and that meant continuing to share, even when it was difficult. My mission was just beginning, but each step I took seemed to confirm that I was on the right path. The feeling of renewed purpose grew within me with each conversation, lecture, and meeting that took place. The mission I had been given during my near-death experience was materializing before my eyes, but there was still a long way to go. My commitment to this cause, preparing people for the events to come and encouraging them to seek truth and unity, has become the driving force in my life. Visions of the days of November 2024 accompanied me like a constant shadow. They weren't just images, they were reminders that there was urgent work to be done. I began planning broader ways to reach people, knowing that every small action could create bigger waves of transformation. One night, while reflecting in my small office, I received an unexpected email from Clara, the woman I met during a talk. She suggested organizing a larger event, where people from different communities could come together to share experiences and seek collective solutions. "You have already started something powerful, Gideon," she wrote. "Let's expand this. People are ready to listen." With her support and the support of others who had been touched by my story, we organized what we called the Circle of Truth. It was a modest meeting at first, held in a community library. But as people shared their experiences and perspectives, the movement began to grow. During the event, I met a young man named Eric who worked at a local radio station. He offered to interview me on a program about spirituality. The idea was frightening. Up until that point, my story had only been shared in small circles. But Eric encouraged me. "You have a message that needs to be heard," he said. "Even if it doesn't reach everyone, those who need to hear will hear." I accepted the invitation, and a few weeks later I sat down in front of a microphone in a small radio studio. The interview was emotional. I told about my NDE, about meeting Jesus and Alora, and shared the prophetic visions in detail. The response was immediate. The program received dozens of connections from people who wanted to know more, some excited, others skeptical, but all intrigued. This marked the beginning of something bigger. Other interviews followed, on radio, podcasts, and eventually small local television channels. Each new opportunity challenged me to find clear and impactful ways to convey the message without fear of judgment or doubt. Meanwhile, I continued to change my own life. At work, I was able to not only improve my relationships with colleagues, but also inspire them to be more collaborative. Hostility and conflicts have given way to a more productive and supportive environment. In my personal life, I made a commitment to dedicate more time to my family and community. My mother, who always believed in me, became a great ally in organizing events and spreading the message. She often reminded me, "You have a light now, Gideon. Don't let it go out." The transformation was not only external, but also internal. My relationship with God deepened, not as a passive dependency, but as an active partnership. Faith became a force that motivated me to act, to grow, and to help others. As the days of November 2024 approached, I felt my mission was taking hold. It didn't matter the size of the platform or the number of people I reached. The important thing was that I was planting seeds of truth, hope, and unity. Every small act, every word shared, was a step toward a greater purpose. I was living the mission I was given during my NDE, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As the days of November 2024 approached, the urgency in my soul seemed to grow. The visions I witnessed during my near-death experience, NDE, were not just memories, they were calls to action. pulsing like a constant reminder that the world was on the verge of profound transformation. I knew I couldn't change destiny alone, but I also knew that every step I took could help others prepare spiritually and emotionally for what was to come. The circles of truth began to expand beyond my initial expectation. What began as modest gatherings in libraries and community halls now took place in churches, schools, and even public parks. People from different backgrounds attended, some seeking hope, others just curious. However, they all left the meetings with something, a reflection, a question, or a feeling of belonging. At one of these meetings, a young woman named Emily approached me after my talk. "Gideon," she said, "I always felt like there was something wrong with the world, but I could never put it into words. Your story gave me the courage to seek the truth and stop ignoring the signs around me." This type of response strengthened me. It didn't matter how big the impact was, every soul touched made it worth it. I also started to integrate other ways of reaching more people. With the help of Eric, the young radio host I met, I started a podcast series called Light in Darkness, where I shared not only my experience, but also brought in other guests to talk about spirituality, unity, and social change. The reach of the program was surprising. People from other cities began sending messages, reporting how the content had inspired them to transform their lives and communities. In parallel, my personal routine became an extension of my purpose. Every morning, I dedicated time to meditation and prayer, asking for strength and clarity to continue. In the community, I was actively involved in social actions, organizing donations and offering emotional support to those in difficulty. Despite all the progress, there were times when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. There were nights when I woke up with a start, with images of the leaders being exposed and the initial chaos unfolding. It was as if the future was at my door, waiting to enter. At these times, the words of Jesus echoed in my mind, "Do not fear chaos, for it precedes the light." These words helped me move forward. I decided that I would not only share the message of the changes that were coming, but also prepare people to face them. During the meetings, I began to emphasize the importance of unity, truth, and resilience. "The coming changes will test our faith and our character," I said, "but they will also be an opportunity for us to rebuild the world on stronger and fairer foundations." Meanwhile, I continued to receive messages from people who had been touched by my story. A local pastor, after attending one of my talks, invited me to speak at his church. "The world needs to hear this, Gideon," he said. "People need to know that even in the chaos, there is hope." At the event, I spoke to more than 200 people. It was the biggest audience I've ever had, and at the end, dozens of people came to share their own experiences and fears. An elderly woman, holding my hands, said, "You reminded me of something I forgot long ago, that there is goodness and truth in the world, even if it sometimes seems hidden." These moments were fuel for my mission. They reminded me that even if I couldn't reach everyone, each person touched could become a flame, illuminating others around them. As the days of November 2024 approached, my determination only grew. He knew he couldn't predict exactly how everything would unfold, but he was prepared to face whatever came and to help others face it as well. My mission was clear: to bring light to darkness, truth to lies, and hope to despair. I had been transformed by my near-death experience, but this transformation wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who crossed my path, everyone who was willing to listen, and everyone who was looking for purpose amidst life's uncertainties.